Hi guys, it is Dom here. I just had a wonderful chat with Ian Winwood, acclaimed British music journalist from Barnsley, no less, originally, talking about his journey in the music industry, his book Bodies, which has some very, very important conversations around how the music industry is making people ill. I would heartily advise that you go check that book out. It certainly changed my perception on a few things. But this was a wonderful chat about how Ian changed through the development of the book and how he's kind of what he's learned about himself and the music industry. By creating the book itself. Obviously, some lovely lessons here for young people as well, young people in the north of England, creatives in the north of England who are looking to get into journalism and the media. So I hope you enjoy this. Thank you to Ian for the time, and really appreciate you guys checking this out. Thank you. Ian, I just want to say on record as we're starting off, thank you very much for writing Bodies. It's a wonderful, it's obviously had a wonderful impact on a lot of people. Whether that's musicians, internationally touring musicians, independent musicians, and things like that. So I appreciate all of the effort you put into that. And thank you for joining me today. First off, obviously you're in the States. You talked a little bit off record about it. How have you found being in the US? You traveled a lot for work over the years, back and forth and all over the place. How have you found it culturally for you? What are you enjoying about being in the US at the moment?
Well, first of all, Dom, hello to you. Thanks for inviting me on, and hello to anyone and everyone who might be listening. Yeah, in Bodies, there's actually a little. There's quite a few humorous bits, I hope, but there's one where I discuss as a music journalist when I first started coming to America. Not when I first started coming to America, when I first started coming to America on a really regular basis. And I mean, sort of as many as, 3 or 4 times a month.
Yeah.
And when this first started happening, I just thought it was the most, which of course it was, the most incredible thing and exciting thing. And I was at the point where, and I write about, I think I describe it as a lifetime of cultural osmosis. So, sort of taking my cues from things that I'd seen from America, and I don't know things in the UK, things that I'd seen in the UK from America, and it could even be something as something as slight as Chinese food in paper cartons, people eating Chinese food out of paper cartons. But if you factor in rock and roll and you factor in movie, I guess what you'd call soft power, for some reason, to my imagination, it just had an unbelievable stranglehold. So everything about it, I mean, I do mean everything was about it was exciting to me, and in many ways it's sort of remained so. So I'm presently in New York for 6 months, for 6 months. And the reason we're here, my wife works for a publisher, Penguin, and she's working at their Manhattan office for 6 months, and I'm really very much the happy-go-lucky plus one. Now, I have been to New York many
Yeah.
times, but this is the longest. I think we're now into our 10th or 11th week, and this is the longest that I've spent, in the United States, and uh, 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 and I sort of, I guess, feel like a New Yorker, although I'm aware that it's not permanent. So it's and yeah, we moved yesterday from this is I'm now speaking to you from our third address in the United States. For the first month, we lived in Bed-Stuy, in Brooklyn. And then we moved to Ridgewood, which is in Queens. If anyone's seen the Scorsese film, The Irishman, much of The Irishman was filmed in Bed-Stuy, and in Ridgewood, I beg your pardon. And yesterday we moved to Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan. I'm going to be perfectly honest with you, largely so I can say I live in Hell's Kitchen. Not just hell,
Hell's
the
Kitchen.
kitchen. Hell's
Yeah.
Kitchen, the hottest part of hell. And in years to come, I can say I lived in New York, and people say where. So, well, yeah, well, for part of the time we lived in Hell's Kitchen, in much the same way that that I'm such a shallow person. In much the same way that when people who aren't, I guess, aren't from London, and even some who are, say, "Where do you live in London?" and I say, "Oh, I live in Camden Town."
Mm.
They usually go, "Oh, wow, cool," and that's like oxygen to me.
Yeah.
It's nourishment. That kind of reaction covers all 5 major food groups for me. So
Yeah.
so that's it. I'm not sure I answered your question there, Dom.
No,
Yeah,
no, yeah.
mustard.
I'm glad you're having a good time. And I do want to talk about that. We're going to come back to something that you talked about at the end of your book, at the end of this chat, because I want to
Sure, okay.
bring a little bit about that and some of the perception stuff that comes along with being in the industry.
Right.
But yeah, you meant obviously I think it took you 16 months to do bodies around that. I think you said in an interview it was around 16 months, and obviously you've obviously promoted it at festivals. You've done talks on it. You've obviously signed books in New York now. Over the whole process, how would you say that you changed and developed? What did you learn about yourself through the process of starting the book? Speaking to people you call friends. Frank Turner, Simon Hill. All those people that you
Yeah.
met. What did you learn about yourself through the process of starting the book all the way to its completion, and now you're in the promo cycle, if you like? So what have you learned about yourself through that process?
That's an extraordinarily good question, Dom. I noticed first of all that recently I've added a couple of months to that 16. It's now apparently taken me 18 months. 16, with what I describe as farm to table. 16 months does sound
Yes.
about right. So let me deconstruct that a little bit. I guess no one wants to know how the sausages are made, but having said that, I realize now, having finished the book, and having now had time to reflect on it, on the actual words on the page, that when I started it, I I tasked myself with writing a book that was harder to write than my technical abilities allowed. There are, particularly at the moment, there are a number of music books, and it is a good period for music books, I would
Mm,
say.
mm,
There are a number of music books that are just straight up memoirs. Uh, Fortunately, all of them were published slightly. I mean, we're talking like between a week and sort of 6 months after Bodies, that timing is fortunate for
mm,
me. Um, but I knew, and I'm not attempting to diminish the memoir, the linear memoir that starts in the past and finishes in the present. I don't mean to diminish that form. For some reason, it never appealed to me. The idea just of telling a story of my life just didn't sing to me. It just didn't. I didn't think I could really get a tune that would last for a book out of it, and it just wasn't exciting to me or inspiring to me. So I came up with the idea of wrapping it up in a larger theme, and the larger theme, the very, very shorthand version of the larger theme, is how the music industry in many cases makes people ill, sometimes kills them. But even if it doesn't do anything, even if it doesn't do these things or anything like these things, it still warps them in noticeable
mhm,
ways that
mhm.
I can usually uncover in about 20 seconds.
Yeah.
Um, uh, but and you will notice, Dom, and the listener will notice that even after sort of even after an appreciable period of time, I'm still quite rubbish at describing the book itself. I still find it difficult to do,
Mm,
because I guess, but in the terms of writing it, it's many different things. Sometimes it's funny, sometimes it's shocking, sometimes
I agree.
It's flippant. Sometimes I'm reporting information given to me by people, and it is truly, truly precious cargo, death by suicide,
Hmm.
and the worst kind of crimes, actually. And I have a real responsibility to transport that to the page, with the utmost care and attention. uh and other times I'm just talking about myself, but then so it's a lot of things. The point being that I did not have the skill to write the book as it presently exists when I started writing it. I didn't realize I didn't have the skill, but it became quickly apparent. So I've likened it, apologies because I'm reusing this, but I've
No.
likened it to painting the Forth Bridge or the Golden Gate Bridge,
Mm.
to the extent that I'd finish it and then I'd need to start again, because I got better at writing during the period and at the task of putting the book together.
Mm.
Uh, Now that it's done, I don't know when this is going out. It's on my mind at the moment because the US North American edition has just come out, and next month in the United Kingdom, the what's known as the mass market paperback edition will be published, and it's got an extra chapter in it that I
Oh,
wrote.
cool.
So that's coming out in April. So it's sort of been on my mind. The only thing, Dom, of which I was sure and upon which I would have staked my life, I know that's very dramatic language, is that uh, the only shot the book had was if I wrote absolutely the best that I could manage, the best book that I could manage. Now, whether that I have to add the rather self-conscious caveat that 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 does in saying that that doesn't mean that objectively it's a good book, because that's none of my business how it compares to other books. I have no control of that. I mean, subjectively, it is certainly at the time that it was written. I mean, I'm always, I hope, getting better at what I do, but certainly at the time that it was written, absolutely the best of which I am capable.
Mm.
And what that and I thought, if that happens, that there might be a chance that someone might read it and then say to their friend, "Oh, I read this book," and the most priceless commodity for a non-celebrity author. My wife has warned me about me making jokes about being a celebrity. Okay, uh,
Okay.
no, so I'm not going to say, I am kind of a celebrity these days. For non-celebrity authors, the most priceless commodity in publishing is word of mouth, the good
Mhm.
word,
Yeah.
and it does seem to have achieved that. And also, I suppose I understood on some level that the that in order to be proud of it, because and here's a bit of advice for anyone that's listening that wants to do what
Mm.
I do in
Mm.
terms of publishing. You've got to hustle. You've got to sort of be a little bit extrovert and promote, not yourself. I don't think I promote myself, but I'm tireless at promoting bodies. And I've been looking at lots of people on social media have mentioned it, have
Mhm.
tweeted about it, have put on Facebook about it, and on Instagram, which I'm just mastering. And because I am so, I mean, I want to make a joke about this to diminish it, but I'm not going to, because I'm just so very, very proud of the book.
Mm.
It makes it easier in good conscience to just keep going, me, book, to try and keep it in the game. So I think, had I cheated, had I not I am talking about, sorry, I know I'm
No,
taking
no.
all the time. I mean, I am talking about attention to detail on the page that bordered on the obsessive, I would
Mm.
say. The
Okay.
book was written during two very severe lockdowns, so that
Yes.
helped. uh But I remember at one point, one paragraph. It took me about 6 hours to get one paragraph right.
Mm.
Now, not everything was at that glacial pace, but just thinking, look, staring at the computer at sort of 3:30 in the morning, thinking there's something wrong with the flow of this paragraph.
Mm.
What is it? And thinking I've been doing this one paragraph for 6 hours. And then, if I look at it now, and I don't spend, I don't just read the book and then start reading it again. It's been a while actually since I've looked at it, so I don't have a physical copy. There are bits now that I look at and I think, oh, I could probably have done that, not necessarily better, but slightly differently. But I'm extremely sanguine and philosophical about that, because at the time that it was written, there is not a semicolon, comma, dash. There's not a one or two letter word that has not been considered inside and out. So I'd obviously decision. Yeah, that's the answer to the question that you asked several hours ago, Dom.
It's okay. It's okay. Again, a lot of thought has gone into it, and that is clear, like you've just mentioned. I mean, this is my perception as a reader. I wonder, because there's a lot of deep stuff in there, from your own life, and we'll talk about the industry stuff, of course, in a second. But you talk obviously openly about the death of your dad in there in the chapter God's Comic, and then you talk about. I know you don't like the term mental health, or you talk, it makes you cringe a little bit, but you talk about your own mental health challenges relating to other people's mental health challenges as well later on in the epidemic chapter, and I wonder, did the book give you a sense of catharsis once it was done? Did you feel like you were not done with those experiences, not that you could put them to bed, but did it feel like a release in more ways than just having having the book out there? Was it a release for you personally?
Again, that's a good question and a slightly difficult question to answer. No, I didn't find it cathartic in the slightest.
Okay.
And I didn't find that I learned anything about myself. That's not to say that it wasn't worthwhile. Well, it was worthwhile because they were good stories. In a journalistic sense, the stories I had about myself are the reason that the book exists. So that's one thing. And even when they were happening, the only part of the book, Dom, that I don't particularly like to talk about, not because it's difficult to talk about, because actually it's not, but because it's the one book, one part of the book that should be kept under wraps, is that chapter God's Comic. And even when that was happening, this is my lips to God's ear, even when that was happening on the day itself, I mean, if anyone has read the book or goes on to read the book, when they get to it, they'll know exactly what I'm talking about. Even as that was happening, I was thinking, this is a really good story. This is really good material. So I can never quite divorce from being a writer, I guess. What it was worthwhile is that it taught me, again, a lot about writing, because I am in a number of pretty desperate straits in the book. It's not me. I don't write about my best days, and I learned so much about technique, about presenting myself in a way, first of all, that was honest, but in a way that I did not hate myself on the page, so that I didn't want to make myself appear. I found it very tricky to learn how to do it without making it look like I was glamorizing this or attempting to mythologize this, but at the same time to be sort of theatrically condemnatory about it. So yeah, and I guess so that the reader cared about the person on the page. I found that that was something that I had to learn how to do, because of course, as a music journalist, overwhelmingly, I had never written about myself before. And part of the appeal of bodies for me was the fact that for the first time in my quote unquote career, I don't know why I shy away from that word, but I do. The first time in my quote unquote career, I was placing myself in the game and saying, I will write about me and what's happened to me with the same degree of, I hope, forensic, certainly with the same kind of unsparing detail that I have done about other people. And I think that was significant, that I did not spare myself.
Yeah, 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 and I think that's important. You know, that sort of honesty does come into it. And again, I don't want to spoil the book, but again, it is a beautiful and intense read, particularly in those parts. Talking about some of that, you know, that sort of in-depth knowledge that you bring. There's a lot in the book around the industry not giving people a chance to reflect. Constantly having to move forwards to push for the next interview, the next, you know, cover, the next, you know, whatever that may be, from both a journalistic standpoint and also a musician standpoint. I wonder, I don't, obviously I don't want to assume the answer here, but there are interviews with the likes of Geordie Shenton in there, who does some wonderful work with Tonic Rider. For those who are interested in musicians' mental health, fantastic. Geordie's lovely. But I wonder, do you have, because you changed again, you changed a lot. Your growth was evident in the book. You know, you're not doing some of the things that you obviously openly talk about doing. You're not doing those things anymore. So do you have more of a, do you have a self-care plan in place for yourself these days, where you don't push yourself quite as hard? You're not up till, unless it's for, you know, the book or a particular creative endeavor, you're not up till 3 a.m., 4 a.m., you know, getting copy ready. Do you kind of, are you kind of more mindful of your brain and your body now, not necessarily as a result of the book, but just in general?
Yes and no. My wife has helped me with this. At the start of the book, I identify a number of mental health assignations, diagnoses, none of which I think particularly apply. And I hope I go on to explain that later in the book. I'm not, to be honest with you, I'm not sure I've explained it quite as clearly as I might have done. But the only diagnosis that I think, Dom, that is without question utterly nailed on is impulse control disorder, and I can feel things speeding up. Now, my wife has done a little bit of private detective work on other, and she has she thinks she's identified just a undiagnosed neurodiversity issues, which need not detain us here. But I found her explanations convincing and consistent. Now, the thing is, I am, and I remain, and I am quite happy to be a obsessive and rather extreme person.
Okay.
Now, the key is to direct those obsessions. To quote Elvis Costello, who I love, in time you can turn these obsessions into careers. To turn these obsessions into things that won't kill me. You know, so rather than taking life-threatening amounts of cocaine, for example. Again, I laugh every time, and I don't know why, because I suppose there's not much funny about it. Quote unquote, rock and roll. To going out running every day, even when it's freezing cold in New York, and it's dark and it's sleeting. Going out running, for at least 9 or 10 miles every day, and sort of not feeling right in my head unless I do that. And if it's only 45 minutes, then that just it's not worth it. That's not particularly intellectually, rationally consistent. but its inconsistency isn't going to prove a danger to
Mm,
me.
mm, mm,
Whereas in the past, well, 1 gram of cocaine is no good. That's no good. It has to be 3.5 grams. Those approaches to running and to cocaine are exactly the same. But the running thing is not going to do me any harm. Me running, on the west on the riverside later today, in New York, and going longer than is necessary. That's perfectly fine. I'll be slightly healthier in doing that. So it's a question of directing that impulse. And I quite like that, because the thing about it is I don't want to give it all up. I don't mean the lifestyle choices. I'm glad I've given those up. I don't want to give that. That's, I think, it's a big part of my personality.
mm,
And I think in the writing of Bodies, um, it is absolutely to the book's benefit that I obsessed so closely over even the tiniest of details.
mm,
And I'm not saying that other authors don't do that, and some do and some don't. I know that. As it so happens, I do, and I would have, and I don't overuse this language because this is sort of my neurodiverse head talking. The word is correct. I would have found it unbearable had I done anything other than that. As it relates to Bodies, I would have felt that the positive attention that it has received, I would have felt fraudulent had
mm,
I not. And that is assuming it would have got that attention had I not, put it all out there. But were it to have been applauded, and I didn't think highly of it, that would have been unbearable. So in answer to your question that you asked several hours ago, Dom, no, I'm pretty much, to quote Paul Simon, after changes upon changes, we are more or less the same. I'm probably exactly the same person I was, even at my most miserable and sordid ebb. But I'm just training my guns, on effective targets now, rather than at myself.
yeah, yeah, that's an interesting way of looking at it, and I really do enjoy your in-depth answers, Ian. So
Thank you.
don't
Well,
worry too
thank
much
you.
about that.
I mean, to be honest, John, I'm not worried about it at all. So that's jolly good.
Good, good. That is good. Again, I appreciate that honesty there, because there is something about people. I believe people can fundamentally change, but sometimes that change comes through some maybe misdirecting some of those obsessions, or
Yeah,
directing them in a better way,
yeah,
better way, whatever that
yeah,
means
yeah.
to the audience. I think that there's something, again, in the book. One thing that sort of strikes me is that, again, people get obsessed with these definitions of success and what that means to different artists at different levels. And I do wonder, how do you define success now? Again, as a near, I don't want to say a celebrity author, but a notable author who has achieved, obviously, again, your dreams. You have documented in there that you have achieved the things you set out to do as a child, as a young person. Might not have been everything you thought it was going to be, but you
Mm.
certainly lived what many would call the dream. So how do you define success now, and what does that mean to you? And has your definition of that changed over your career?
Do you mean in a personal success, Dom?
Personally, yes. Personally, yeah.
Well, first of all, not to keep returning to this, it helps to compartmentalize
Hmm.
them. Uh, uh, so, Bodies is, to my mind, an unqualified creative success, and it would have been that, to my mind. Although I would have been plowing a lonely furrow had no one bought it, or if 8 people had bought it. It's easier to bask in that. So I'm going to answer this question completely
Please, yeah.
honestly.
Thank you.
I used to think that all that mattered was the creative aspect, the words on, as it relates to what I do, the words on the page. Because the opposite of that is that whichever is the highest selling art form, you know, whether it be an album or whether it be a film, the highest selling is the most successful, and that's not consistent. So it's entirely, but it's a fool's errand, you know, trying to measure art against other art forms. You know, who is to say whether AC/DC's Back in Black is as good, is worse, or is equal to, for example, Spilt Milk by Jellyfish, right? But one is obviously many magnitudes, many multitudes bigger than the other.
Yeah.
More creatively successful. And so I do still think that what is the most important thing, the starting point, the foundation block, is the book, the music, the film, the play, the poem, whatever it may be, the vocal performance, whatever it may be. That's the start. But books, I'm trying to communicate something. Why would I write a book if I wasn't trying to communicate something? So by definition, books need readers.
Yes.
And my book has got readers. You know, it's presently at, one version of it is presently at number 2 on the Amazon Music chart after almost 11 months in the field. Like I said, with a new version about to come out. And I say that, and were I listening to myself, if I didn't know me, Dom, and I was listening to myself on this podcast, I would probably bristle a little bit at the bold way I said that. But it is lovely to have readers. I wrote the book for a pitifully low wage. I worked it out. I wrote it for an hourly rate of £2.50 an hour.
Right.
Okay. There are undocumented workers in the East End of London who earn more than £2.50 an hour. Yeah, so I worked it out, and my hourly rate was £2.50 an hour. If I worked a bit faster, I could have, maybe earned £10 an hour, but that really would be flying. And I don't think people can write that fast. So even if I wrote the book in a quarter of the time, I would have been working for minimum wage. Let's put it that way. And as yet, I have yet to earn any royalties, but it likely will happen, and it will likely happen quite soon. So that's obviously terrific. Some figures about books. 90% of published books sell fewer than 2,000 copies. So what I'm basically saying is I'm already kind of a rock star, in literary terms. I'm smiling as I'm saying this, just so you understand. But I've sold, far more than that. And one of the things that I truly, truly love, and perhaps even, Dom, I love it a bit much, is basking in the rays of bodies, because I've kind of surprised myself with the book, to be honest. And I'm really, really enjoying, like I said, if I weren't so aligned to it, I would feel fraudulent. But because I'm in complete agreement with what not everybody, with what people have been kind enough to say about it, I quite like being the center of this kind of attention. So it's nice to be read, and it's nice to be. I'm really, really enjoying that, and that is a real change, because I have written a couple of books in the past, and what's happened to them is that they have disappeared from my mind, actually, literally days after they've been published. Right. I've not known how many copies they've sold. I've not had any feedback, none feedback at all from any readers whatsoever. And I was completely fine with that. I don't remember being perturbed by that in any way whatsoever.
Mm.
I just took pleasure in the writing of the book, and harvested a sense of accomplishment from writing it. And then it was done. With Bodies, it's been different.
Mm.
Uh, so and that's been an amazing surprise to me. In answer to in order to fully answer that question, I need to think what I need to do next and continue, because I'm going to have to turn my back on Bodies sooner or later, even though I don't want to, because I'm kind of I'm enjoying I'm enjoying I'm enjoying the after party. Let me
Yes.
put it like that.
Yeah, as well you should, and we'll talk about anything else coming up that you can tell me in a little bit. One of the things.
There ain't nothing else coming up, Dom.
All right, well, we'll do a bit of plugging. We'll do a bit of plugging at the end, but I
Okay.
do have a few more questions
Sure,
for you.
please.
One of the things that it was interesting to note was there's a lot of talk about the Northern Grit. Obviously, you talk quite openly about your beginnings in Barnsley,
Yeah.
and kind of moving to London, getting that sort of first job with Kerrang, and there's that first bit of work, and there's also you also reflect that a lot of the people around you in these offices were also from across the north, and that is a thing that I've sort of struggled with most of my working life. I was able to move to London, and I was able to live there and do internships and placements to build my career, because half my family are split between London and Yorkshire.
Right.
But,
Okay.
but most of the people we work with, who are wonderfully talented writers, journalists, they're coming off creative writing courses, they're coming off journalism courses in the north, Leeds, Preston, Sheffield, etc. And they sort of they worry that they've got financial stuff to worry about. They're worrying about still now, and it was the same 10 years ago, 15 years ago when I was starting.
Yeah.
They're still worrying, do I need to move to London? And I wonder, do you think now, in this day and age, as you reflected at the end of your book, how things have changed, in terms of you what you were doing, being paid to fly to all these places, doesn't happen so much anymore. So do you think that, I once asked Terry Beasley this, and he said flat out, yes, absolutely, you need to move to London to be successful in journalism. I wonder if do you have the same thoughts as a northerner who has moved and who has got all these experiences through taking that risk, if it's possible for you? And I should preface this, and I always say, if you can afford it, then do it. Yes. If you've got the money behind you, then absolutely go and do that. But if not, there are ways around it.
Yeah.
But I wanted to get your thoughts on that.
Well, first of all, I mean, I know Terry,
Yeah.
and I love him, but the kid's an idiot. You don't need to. You don't need to move to London. I don't think. Certainly not now. It needs to be said, Dom. Terry's not an idiot. That bit was a joke. That was
Okay.
just my way of saying I disagree with Terry there.
Yeah.
And Terry's from London as well. So she's from South London. And first of all, I moved to London because I desperately wanted to move to London. It just so happened that it dovetailed so nicely with music, it being the epicenter of far more music magazines than there are now. That was just a happy coincidence. I had started to, since visiting the city as a 12-year-old, and just thinking, I've just never seen anywhere like this in my life, and I just cannot wait to come back. Sort of from the age of about 15, because I spent my teenage years in Buckingham, you see, although I identify as both a South Yorkshireman and a Londoner. I think it's that I don't see any contradiction in that duality. No. I was lucky in that my secondary school years were in Buckinghamshire, which was, although not, it wasn't close to necessarily, it wasn't like being in High Wycombe or St Albans. It wasn't that close to London, but with the permission of my mum, uh, who was very liberal in that regard, I could go to watch concerts in London, often on my own.
Mm.
So I was already becoming familiar with the city. I knew how to use the tube. I knew where Hammersmith was, for example, in relation to Camden. And so it was already coming to life for me, and I already wanted to be part of that big city scene.
Mm.
Uh, I don't mean a music scene necessarily. I meant I wanted to live in the city, and I still want to live in the city, and I still want to live in big cities. That's still very much a part of my identity. Um, it's not necessary, I don't think. No, I don't think it is necessary. Um, was there I've slightly lost touch with
Yeah,
your question, Dom.
the reason I ask is because again, a lot of people, they come to me and what we do, and they're like, oh, I can't afford to
Oh,
move
right.
to London. And a lot of journalists that I was, because I did my internships, my first internships at Rocksound and Hammer, and
Yeah,
a lot of those people that were with me were living, you know, like they were living in, like, flats with no light, and it was a real struggle for
yeah.
them. Again, I was commuting quite a long time, but I was living with
And
distant family.
where were you commuting
So,
from, Dom, if you don't mind me asking?
this was before Uber, and I have cerebral palsy, so I always struggled with the underground. So I did Staines into Liverpool Street, and I
Right.
also did, and then later on I did Camberwell. So I had to do
Yeah,
two buses in, and then walk with me sticks to get to it, because I also did stuff, the gadget magazines, Future and stuff like that.
sure. Okay.
Yeah, but that was my experience, and obviously I'm very privileged to have that, you know, sort of split family there, and I just recognized that. And one of the reasons we exist today doing this is that, again, for people that cannot afford to do that, it's difficult. And what, again, sorry, I've gone off now. This is
No,
my
it's good.
neurodivergence talking. Is that people go, well, how can I make it work? They look at you and then what you've done, and they go, well, I must do that. And they look at other examples and go, well, I must do that. But things have changed, as you observed, and there is without going into too much detail, there is a lot of stress and anxiety around being in an office, and sometimes some toxicity is present in some offices, as
Yeah,
you allude to in your book, without going into too much detail.
yeah.
So, again, sorry, I'll simplify that question. Do you need to move to London in 2023 to be a successful journalist? Because I'm a big advocate for doing multiple types of journalism. I like to be diverse, but working in music and the music industry and music journalism on a wider level.
No, you don't.
Okay.
You don't. And in fact, it's becoming so that the circumstances as you describe them, Dom, people at the Hammer or at Rock Sound living in tiny flats in Leighton, or sorry, this is quite London
Yeah.
centric, but the question sort of demands it. These people will get to an age where they maybe get to 30 and they want to start thinking about settling down, and maybe having children, and you start thinking about schools, and I've been slightly looking that I haven't done that. I've remained sort of this eternal adolescent. But you're sort of almost limiting your shelf life there, because you're sort of like living as only really a young and hungry person would, in order to try and make it work. And by all means, do that if you fancy it. But be aware that you're not necessarily going to enjoy doing that when you're 48 years old, for example. Uh, Now, a larger question remains as to whether it is in fact possible to make a living from music journalism unless you are in an office as an editor or a designer. Uh, that's what's really changed. The word rates at Kerrang, for example, are the same as they were. In fact, they're slightly less than they were 22 years ago. And I
Right.
don't mean in real terms, I mean in pound pounds per pence and pounds. They might not like me saying that, but they can go to hell, to be honest, because I think it's important that people need to realize what it is they are potentially getting into. Now, it was always the case, Dom, even when I arrived at Kerrang, which is the magazine that I wanted to write for from when I was 14 years old. So it was no minor moment. I arrived at Kerrang in 2000, and already there were two different types of music journalists, two different categories, I should say, of music journalists. There was those such as myself, for whom it was the sole source of income. I was very lucky because Kerrang placed me on a retainer, which meant that I earned a set amount every week, whether I was published or not. And on the weeks that I exceeded that amount, they would make up the difference. That no music journalist is going to be placed on that kind of deal today. So I was in a really privileged position. But along with that, and along with others, there were only two of us that were on retainers. And then there were a field of music journalists who were full time and who would make their living. There was enough, it was a weekly magazine. There was enough work for people to earn a living. And remember the things that they would have in all likelihood spent their money on concerts and records. They got those for free. So that was helped as well. It was like in a kind of a subsidized, like a subsidized canteen, but you got concerts and records for free. But then there were a field of in the field, usually almost always outside of London, a complement of terrific writers. Mark Griffiths in Wales was one. Paul Travers in Sheffield's exceptionally fine Kerrang writer. Kerrang legend, I would go so far as to say. And they had what we would call day jobs, quote unquote day jobs. So if they were able to interview someone at the weekend, or if they were able to take a day's holiday, they would do that. But for the most part, they would review albums and concerts. And they would earn, certainly more than beer money, a tidy sum from doing that, while having no illusions that they were going to try and make this their full-time gig. It was just, and that's especially the case now. You need to think about the overwhelming likelihood. I don't mean to be discouraging here, but you need to think about whether you can make a living from this.
Yeah.
And I don't know if it's possible.
Yeah. The journalist side of it, the creative side of it, unless you're doing publishing, editing, something like that.
Yeah. I mean, all I did, Dom, and all I do actually, but all I did was write. I didn't do anything else, nothing else. So
yeah, it became everything you were and everything you wanted to be, sort of consuming. Yeah. Which I think is good, but there's a lot of reality in there, and I do have again sort of two or three more, and
sure.
Certainly again appreciate your honesty. If I could get you to put your university lecturer head on just for the purposes of this, if there was a group of students watching this back on a music journalism course in Central Lancashire or wherever it may be.
Oh no, I don't want to be shown in Lancashire. That's no, I'm not. No.
All right, mate. No. Where's the closest? I think York St John's have one. How about York? There we go.
Okay, yeah. Oh, this is. I didn't. Sorry, I thought I spelt this out. This is for Yorkshire only.
Okay, mate. Well, if you were sort of sitting in front of a group of students now, what would be the things, sort of key tips, if you could give me, say, two things that you want to see, and crucially, because this gets ignored quite a lot in those sort of circumstances, mistakes from people that you wouldn't want to see for any music journalists, any creatives trying to get a job in the music industry. What kind of things would you want to see from somebody and what kind of things would you want someone to avoid in terms of mistakes?
Right. In the hope of becoming a music journalist.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
Or a journalist at large, I suppose.
Well, a creative. Should we? You mean like
Yeah,
creative journalism?
creative.
Let me relate it to what I do.
Yes.
Um, what I do, what I don't want to see. I don't. Well, good question. Music journalism is a sort of. It's a ridiculous thing. It's increasingly a ridiculous thing because it used to be when dinosaurs roamed the earth and I wore a younger man's clothes that people such as myself were the gatekeepers between, because unless a band was on the radio or on MTV, the reader had no idea what, and this will blow people's mind. It blows my mind. People people had no idea what that band sounded like. The only way they had of discovering what that band sounded like was to buy the record, to find the record and buy it. Now, if I mentioned a band name, people hearing this could discover what that band sounded like before I'd reached the end of the sentence, or not, certainly not long thereafter. So that's changed. So it then begs the question, and again, I don't wish to be discouraging. It begs the question, what is the point of us? What is the point of me? And in my defense, I would say the point of me is that I will knock you up a feature that you will enjoy reading. And that was sort of always the point. And in order for you to enjoy reading it, I have got to be talking to you, the reader. I have got to be serving you, the reader. Now, because I haven't met you, the reader, I can only imagine who you are, and I'm imagining that I'm the reader. Mm-hmm. So in what I hope is a good way, I am writing for myself, okay? Now, as far as I'm able, I bend over backwards to be fair to the people about whom I am writing. But I am not writing for them. I am not their public relations person. And increasingly, I know that I think that these damn young people, these damn young music journalists, I fear, and I don't want to sound like an old man yelling at clouds, are losing touch with the fact that they are not there solely to promote a band. If I interview a band that I really love, and that I can, whose career I can help because they're a small band touring in a van, and that happened with the Gaslight Anthem. I brought about the Gaslight Anthem very, very early in their career. That's fabulous. But that's not what I'm there to do. What I'm there to do is just to tell a good story. I remember reading something on Twitter a while ago from someone, a young music journalist, said, "Oh, is there anything better than writing about your friend's band?" And it just sort of sent shivers down my spine that you're there just to sort of green light, and you see green light stuff, and you see it in the reviews. The curse of the 4-star review. Very little gets fewer than 4 stars now. I used to go savaging bands all the time, and there was certainly something quite juvenile about the way I did it. But I think that what I was doing is saying, you know what, I'm not part of your damn PR team. I'm not here to make your life easy. So if I could attack, I would attack. So what I would say is, if I saw someone that don't, this is what I don't want. Don't be friends with the bands. That's not your place, and it's corrupting. I have a few exceptions to this rule, but there aren't really many. And even the ones that are, I've kind of, been unkind about in reviews, or not. not unkind, not positive. Don't, if you want to be friends with the band, do be part of their organization. And even then you're not quite a friend because you're an employee.
Yeah.
Don't be a music journalist. It's not your job to be friends. So what I would look for, I cannot discourage that, the idea of friendship and being and hanging out, and I cannot discourage that enough. So what I would look for, Dom, is, and this needs, is just much less timidity. Don't be afraid of, I called one of the biggest rock stars in the world the worst word it's possible to call someone in Kerrang, and I did it twice. Okay, now I'm not suggesting twice they let me do that, and I'm not suggesting that music journalism should be like that, but it's so, this kind of culture of timidity now and fear, and the idea that we're sort of there just to be positive all the time about the bands and about everything. There's just something about that just gives me the horrors. So if I were a university lecturer, I would look out for people who just, and I'm not suggesting you, again, I'm not suggesting that, well, I'm not only suggesting that we young writers should go out with, with bloodlust. But let's have a little bit more irreverence, shall we, please? And a little bit more skepticism. Because do you know what? Not all bands are great. And let's find a way of writing positively about bands who are honorable and who are worthwhile and who are engaging, but who are not great. Let's find a vocabulary and relocate a vocabulary where we can write about those in measured terms, and then not everything is 4 or 5 stars. That would be someone, I think.
Yeah,
that's why I'd not be a very good university lecturer, the way I've answered that question. Just stop being so damn grateful and happy. And
yeah, I feel like it's the shit sandwich, isn't it? You gotta work
I didn't know I could swear. I didn't know I could swear.
Well, there you go. You're more than welcome.
I called Chad Kroger a cunt twice.
Yeah.
And Kerrang let me do that.
I heard about that. Yeah.
They let me do that. Yeah.
They call you the Yorkshire Raptor, I believe.
One editor did. Yeah.
I enjoyed that. I thought that was great. The last bit of this before we do the plugging bit is something that I observed, because it's something I saw in myself as well that I kind of wanted to talk to you about. It sort of takes it away from the interview bit. Was in the sort of later part of your book, you talk about, ending it on a happy note and being advised by your partner here about ending it on a happy note. And you talked about the I've been there game that you play sometimes.
Oh yeah.
Now I do that, and I'd like to stop it, and I'll tell you why. Like I'll give it so. And this isn't about me, and this is one of the things, like I say, we are there to tell a story, and we're there to story tell. But one thing that, and I think actually that's reaffirmed it. Your previous answer has reaffirmed what I'm trying to get to. I am effectively a storyteller, and that is what I'm there to do. But one of the things that I have as a value, growing up with cerebral palsy, being told that I wasn't going to do these things, and then getting to interview bands that I grew up loving, live in a different country. I got to, this is, you see, I'm doing it now because I'm shoehorning this information in, and who does it mean anything to? Being able to get a visa to go and live in Boston and work there, and doing those things because I was told not to, and I still find myself doing it now. And my much like your environment, people are like, good for you. Good for you. And why should it be anything else? But I wonder, what was it? Has there been a point where, because I know that you obviously very proud of the book, as you should be, and and there's a lot of fanfare around that. But have you let go of the ego that comes with, or that what I would perceive might come with, traveling around the world and doing all these things? Because the book it doesn't read like you're going on about yourself. You're obviously talking about others. It's very honest, it's very open, very raw. But I did notice that you're sort of aware that again, we kind of, as music journalists, have to let go of the ego of, because it's not about us, is it? And I wonder if you had a thought on that, and did you know, have you ever got to a point in your career where you realized, whether it was before the book, during the book, or whatever, where you were like, I have to let go of this ego that is there? I don't know if that makes sense to you.
It does. So what you refer to is the I've been there game that I play with. I would never. So for one thing, I'd never dream of doing this with just anyone. So my wife, who at the time of writing the book was the fiance, and I still do this, so I'd still do this. So we'll be watching a film at the pic. We got the pictures a lot, and we got watching a film at the pictures, and the skyline of Atlanta will come up, for example, and I'll go, Atlanta, I've been there. And then the action will move to Nashville, and I'll go, Nashville, I've been there. I've been there. That's Nashville, I've been there. And it's sort of a comic bit that I do.
Right.
Like I said about when people say, where do you live? And I say Camden Town, and they go, oh, wow, cool. I do love when people say, what do you do? And I say, I'm a music journalist, and they have the same reaction. I myself do not think that there is anything great chicks about that. So I don't necessarily have a particularly big ego in that specific regard. Where I do have a big ego, Dom, and really I cannot overstate its enormity in this regard, is as a writer, as on the page. I am. It is where I express myself with the most fluency, the least amount of self-consciousness. And it is, and I don't even hesitate to say this, on the page is where I am the rock star.
Yeah.
And I make no bones about that, in a way that would be ludicrous were I to attempt to do it in real life here. I know that I'm speaking, and people have told me that I seem energetic and sort of, I guess, confident. But on the page, that's just where I live. It's just where I am at home. And I think that regardless of the there is a certain energy and rhythm to my style that is that. But even if there isn't, even if there weren't, I think it's probably true to say of any writer, especially a writer who has written a book, that there is, it seems to me obvious and undeniable that there is a question of vast ego involved there. Because what they're essentially asking of you, I mean, my wife, God bless her, brought me home. I'm looking at it now on the coffee table, the new Bret Easton Ellis book, The Shards, and previously I read Kazuo Ishiguro's Never Let Me Go. Now, these two books are very little stylistically in common. But what they do have in common is that both of their authors said, and me, and it has nothing to do with the quality of the book or what they're saying is, hey, here's what's going to happen. I'm going to talk or write. I'm going to address you now for, I mean, the audiobook of Bodies, it lasts for 10 hours and 35 minutes. So I'm going to address you for 10 hours and 35 minutes, say, and I'm not going to let you speak. I'm not interested in what you've got to say. I'm just going to say my bit. And I would like you to sit down and either listen to me narrate it or sit down and read it. You can have a break, but I want you to pay attention to what I'm saying in this book, because it's about me. And I hope you like it, but I haven't met you and I'm just going to talk to you and you're a stranger. That seems to me, it seems obvious that there is a question of ego involved there. It's quite a presumptuous idea that strangers would listen to me for essentially half a day. As long as it takes to fly from London to Los Angeles, they'd put up with me, for 10 times as long as I've been talking on this podcast. So yeah, so just I guess since you've cursed, just don't be a dick.
Yeah.
I mean, I would never dream, and I can sometimes feel myself uh saying something and thinking, oh, you've sort of name dropped a little bit there,
Yeah.
and feeling a bit awkward about it, but I'm acutely aware of it.
Yeah.
Just don't be a dick. Don't go in
Yeah.
there and go, yeah, I write for,
Yeah.
I'm off to interview.
Yeah.
Just don't. And I wouldn't. I mean, I'm not. I don't think I'm as good at it as some people are. Some of my friends are, but I'm probably the worst. But I am aware of it. I'm aware of. Not everybody thinks I'm the greatest person in the world, even though they should.
What a wonderful way to finish. And thank you, because again, it sort of gives me a little bit perspective, because I've worked for many years trying to do less of that, because it was like, well, what am I trying to prove, and who am I trying to prove it
Try and prove
to?
you're amazing. It's fine.
There's a deeper conversation and a wider conversation for another time. So
Don't sweat that.
a part two, I'd love to sit down with you again, Ian. Before we finish, again, thank you so much for making the time
Oh,
for
my
me today.
pleasure. My
I've
pleasure.
got I had loads more questions for you, so one day we'll pick it up again. But this is where we test if I've done my job appropriately. Is there anything else I've missed that you would like to plug? You mentioned obviously other editions, and is there anything you want to promote before we finish?
Oh my gosh! Do you know what I ask that at the end of interviews, and it always astonishes me that the people I've interviewed uh, look confused, and now you've asked me, and I'm all confused. I don't think you've missed anything at all. I would say, if at the risk of sounding like a Journey song, don't stop believing. It might be that you're not good enough to be a music journalist, or if that's what you want to do. It might be that circumstances don't allow you to do it. It might be that the opportunities aren't there. But don't assume that that's the case. If you think you can do it, then really, really give it a go. And don't be afraid to approach people directly. And don't, apologies to anyone who is on a course that might be listening this, don't worry too much about being on courses. As it so happens, I'm a trained journalist. I'm a qualified journalist. No one has ever asked me.
Same.
Not right. Not at newspapers. Not at magazines. There is nothing, and just take joy in I'm not liking how I'm sounding here, to be honest with you, Dom, but just, if you want to be a writer, write, and take joy in writing, and write how you want to write, and just try and give it a go if you think that you can, because there are some absolutely fabulous younger, I mean, everyone's younger than me now. There are some absolutely fabulous younger writers. I don't know what their financial situation is. I don't know how they're making it work, if they're making it work, but the words on the page sing. So, and there is still space for that. And in terms of a plug, not to be vulgar, I wrote a book called Bodies, Life and Death in Music, and yeah, it's out now, and there's a new and expanded edition with a slightly different cover art that's coming out on April the 6th in the United Kingdom, and that's the day before my birthday, so I expect cards and presents.
Absolutely. Well, happy advanced birthday, Ian. And again, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it, mate.
My pleasure, Dom.